You guys ready to keep going? Yes? So many great concepts. Hopefully you're taking it all in from the last one. Going to hear a lot of those themes again, the concept of values. I heard Dr. Cooper say it. I know I heard Hernan say this last night when I got to meet you guys. The younger generations are willing to walk if those values are not aligned. And we also talked about Lisa talked about the concept of listening instead of telling, and I love that video idea. So we're going to keep all of those ideas going with our next panel, and I'm going to ask our panelists and our moderator to make their way up to the stage. This next panel is entitled Diversity and Innovation to the Power of Five. Believe it or not, there are 5 generations in the workplace right now. And so you're going to hear a little bit more about how to leverage the experience and the skills that comes with that range. And that's what we are about to explore today. And it is my pleasure to introduce you to the moderator, to Pamela Lip-Hendricks, over here on the end. Pam is the head of executive talent, management, and diversity at JP Morgan Chase. Please put your hands together for our next panel.
So John, where's John? Oh, John. So thanks for the slot right before lunch. We're really excited. So we are going to add some energy, and we're going to keep you going till about 12:30. So we are going to start. I'm going to introduce the panelists. We're going to ask a couple of questions, but I'm coming to you relatively early to see if we can start an interactive dialogue rather than just kind of us moderating it. So think about your questions while you're listening. So we're here to talk about the generations. There are 5 of them. And I think, we've had some really interesting conversations, which are, what is really unique to each generation that we need to really drive in the workplace, that we're hearing really specific needs? Or, as we listen to the needs of each generation, is it really just good across the generations, and it's really good for the workplace environment and the culture of inclusion? And I love Lisa's daughter's comment, which is adults don't have the answers. I'm not sure that we have all the answers, but we have a perspective, and we're hoping to engage in a really good dialogue. So I'm going to start with Umran Beba, who leads PepsiCo's global diversity agenda, and she works with sector leadership teams to execute a sustainable roadmap for PepsiCo's people-related goals. Then we have Yao Cheng, who is the global head of diversity and inclusion, leading BNY Mellon's D&I strategy. And she promotes D&I as a driver of organizational and individual development, engagement, and growth. Then we have Eugene Kelly, who focuses on furthering Colgate's efforts to attract and retain the best people from a diverse and broad base of global talent. So he does it across the organization globally and with the talent focus, which is essential. And Willard McLeod, who is the global head of D&I for Pfizer, who's responsible for leading the development execution of the enterprise-wide D&I strategies. And I just want you to pay attention to a minute, because we're coming back to it. All of us have really different titles, but we do very similar jobs. And I was looking before, Terry, you're the head of inclusion, Lisa's the chief people and culture officer. We're all doing different things, and so what do those titles really mean? We'll come back and explore that in a minute. So to get us started, I think that what would be really good is to think about, for you, as you think about the different generations in the workplace, and this is for each of you, just to give us an overview relatively briefly. What are some of the unique generational issues that really play into your larger strategies, whether it's D&I specific or your broader people strategies in the firm? So we are going to start the opposite way with you, Willard.
So good morning. One of the things that has been unique for me from a generational standpoint looking at Pfizer is that we actually are a pretty tenured workforce. I'd say probably right now when you talk about millennials, they're really right at about 30% globally of the population. And so what's been very unique, we are actually in the process of putting in this year, a new colleague resource group around generations, because we've recognized the need for the groups to be able to work together. You have a very tenured workforce, but we're feeling an energy now with the newer generations coming in and trying to figure out how do we get these generations and groups to work together. I think much of what was highlighted earlier, this notion of, I think, tenured generations typically, they just kind of did their jobs, they worked and moved along. I'm finding with the younger generations a desire to kind of understand how to continue to move along quickly And so the need to figure out how to help them do that has actually prompted this colleague resource group around generations, because I think they're sharing and there's learning that the more tenured groups can have around all of the new technology that we're experiencing in the workforce, which is very disruptive, but which this new generation comes along with too very naturally. And also helping that generation, the more mature generation, helping people understand how to navigate through the culture. And I know we're going to talk more about that, because at the end of the day, culture is the thing that, again, is why people stay in organizations or they leave them ultimately. So
this is, when I was reviewing the questions, this is one that required a lot of thought for me, because I've been with the company for close to 19 years. And when I joined the company, right out of the gate, I was kind of the young one. And what I quickly saw was that there were these very, very long tenured people. Now, I'm just talking about the U.S. because, we've got 8,000 employees across the globe, and a mere 5,000 of them are here in the U.S. So it's kind of a different way of looking at it, depending on where you are and what the demographics are where you are. But here, what I found was that the key was the way we worked. And as a 213-year-old company, it was really, there was this culture that said, this is how you do everything, down to what time you walk in the door. And at that time, it was starting to change in terms of who was coming into our organization. And we actually had some pretty difficult times where the generations clashed. The folks that were working for the older, longer tenured person, it wasn't working for them. So we back then had a generational resource group that helped us to figure out some of that. What I will tell you is that as we start to become a younger workforce, at least in Colgate, what we're finding is that these magical things that we call smartphones are creating environments where you can kind of get to any information anywhere, and you don't have to be in your office to get work done. And we, as an older, more conservative company, have to accept that. And if we don't, we're going to lose to all of our competitors. So I just think that some of the younger mindsets and some of the ways that they're learning and getting information, et cetera, is the way of how we have to change, and period.
I think the more we understand the generational differences, I see us understanding and appreciating differences across the spectrum of diversity and the intersectionality of generational differences with those attributes. And it's becoming undeniably clear that inclusive leadership is an essential competency for anyone who manages a team, whose success depends on working with others, who holds or aspires to an enterprise leadership role. And that pretty much covers everyone. By the way, inclusion, inclusive leadership, emotional intelligence, they're not just drivers of success in the workplace, they're how we can have more rewarding, fulfilling personal lives too. So it's something that we all want to get better at. But back to diversity inclusion strategy, if inclusive leadership and a stronger inclusive culture, if that's what you're after, core objectives of your strategy are going to be creating conditions where your culture can become more inclusive, where your people have the ability and opportunities to develop inclusive leadership as a competency, where culture and your people are able to challenge the status quo, where you have that courage to invite others who are unfamiliar or are going to bring different ideas to the discussion. And it's going to get messy. But you need a culture and you need people who are equipped and capable and empowered to do that.
So about 3 years ago, we decided to look at our own millennials because there is so much research out there, and we did a study with about 5,700 of them out of the 260,000 employee base we have. First of all, about 50% of our employees today are millennials. So we are a little younger, I guess. But in some countries, I'm sure we all see this, India, China, Mexico, some of the developing countries, it's even more than 50%. So basically, they are the leaders, they are the main workforce. What we have found out, there are actually more commonalities than differences. So I think we have to accept that first and see it as a strength. There are more common, everybody wants to have a good career, everybody wants to develop, advance, have purpose, and also have a good manager and respectful relationships. I think that's so common. The differences is the working environment where I think the simplification, agility, decision-making, and seeing the manager as a coach becomes very important for the younger generations. They don't want the traditional manager approach, but they really want to be coached, like on the field, soccer teams or whatever we call it here in the US, it's football teams. But our focus at this point as PepsiCo, because after 12 years of performance with purpose with Indra, now we have our new CEO, winning with purpose. We continue the same journey with purpose. But he's bringing actually a couple of things, acting as owners, simplification, agility, voicing your actually opinions fearlessly. So some of these new behaviors I think the CEO is bringing in the journey of winning with purpose are very important for these generations. But if I want to say one thing, we have to simplify and create a better working environment in terms of technology, collaboration, using virtual connections, the Zoom and the Teams and the SharePoint or whatever. I mean, they want to really work in this kind of an open environment rather than the old-fashioned ways. I think that will be the focus really in the next year or so.
Thanks for that. I think, you know, one of the key threads obviously is technology, but the other thing I think is the importance of managers and how we're relying on them in a different way. Before, I think more traditionally it was command and control and annual reviews, and now it's as this concept as a coach. And those managers are essential in really setting the culture. So if I could go to Eugene and Yao on this one, which is, if you think about the elements of culture, what are those key elements of culture that are really essential in order to kind of make all of the generations feel included and that all of the perspectives from those generations are really valued?
For us, as we've, you know, we have a fairly new CEO, Noel Wallace, who took over the position in April. He's been with the company for over 2 decades, so we all know him well. And we're very excited because many of the traits that he exhibits are ones that in our culture we've desired to have, but in some cases haven't really demonstrated, right? So the concept of listening. Really listening, not waiting for someone to finish talking and then talking, but really listening. He has demonstrated that. The concept of the openness to approach and how we solve issues or create solutions or what have you. This encourages the thinking out of the box that we ask our younger team members to bring to the table, but in the past we have not been receptive to. I mean, they think out of the box, they bring us the answer, and then we say, nah, but we're going to still do it this way. The other thing is just intellectual curiosity. The environment where our folks tell us what they need to get to where they want to be, instead of us telling them, here's what you have to have. This is in the last 3 to 5 years something that I've seen really an explosion in terms of how people learn and how people go after information and how they collaborate, because we're not only saying to people, all right, we're not saying you're a marketing person, stick to marketing. We are expecting people to understand the facets of the business across the board so that they can think through or learn how we as a corporation might address those things, and then we're asking them to bring them to the table regardless of what their function is. And I think that these types of things are really starting to, we've been stuck on innovation for a bit, but now the innovation is really, really starting to flourish because we're allowing people to get out of their little circle and expand. So I think those are some areas that I've seen a marked change in the last 3 to 5 years.
We're going through so much change now, transformation and change that we're driving and bringing onto ourselves, change that we just have to undergo because the markets and the external pressures we face require us to continue to change and adapt. And I think a strong company culture is so important. It's that anchor for us through all this change. And it focuses the mind. It helps us ensure that we are thinking about and doing and putting emphasis on the right things. And those things are, and they're pretty fundamental through change. Clear communications, that we are letting our people know what's expected of them, and that we're giving them the feedback that allows them to continue to develop and adapt and help us drive that change. That we're managing for output and impact. And when your focus is on that, performance and productivity, you're less concerned about things like face time or number of hours worked, or at least they become lower weighted in your criteria for performance assessment. We want to make sure that our leaders are able to adapt better and more quickly, that we are growing enterprise leaders, so people who own the success of the company and know they're contributing to the success of the company. And back to coaching. We all have titles, and it sounds like, you know, we're the ones doing all this work, but I think what you'll get across as we continue to explore this topic is that strong cultures, culture change only happens when everyone in your company feels like they play a role and they want to build the culture that they can be part of, that they can be proud of, that they want to refer talent into, and that they want to stay and continue to build.
Thank you. And I think, you know, as we continue on this conversation, I think one of the things I'm going to read for you in a minute is how the different generations or through the different decades we've thought about expertise, right? I think expertise in more traditional companies, you really get deep in something, you learn it, you know it, you live it, you are the expert. And I think that's changed, especially with the advent of our smartphones, where you can learn and just kind of YouTube anything at any time. So I'm gonna just, I don't know where I got this from. I cannot attribute it, but I love it, so I'm gonna read it anyway. So I am an expert on this subject because I, in 1980, got a doctorate in it. In 1990, I got a bachelor's in it. In 2000, I took an elective on it. In 2005, I read a book about it. In 2010, I read a magazine article about it. In 2015, I read a Wikipedia article about it. In 2016, I read a realtruth.wakeupsheeple.bloggermom.net article about it. In 2017, I watched a documentary about it. And in 2018, I watched a Real Wives house clips on my phone while Netflix autoplayed a trailer for a documentary about it in the background. And I think that just really illustrates how much has changed in a really short amount of time, our perception of what it actually means to be an expert. And so I think I'm going to go to Willard and Umran on this one. How does that change in terms of how people think about being an expert impact the unique experiences that you need to tailor for folks, especially as you think about career development and progression?
You want to start?
Yes. Okay, so our career growth model from very early days to today still has one area which is, I think, very important and valid for all generations, is critical experience. So you might come back from a certain education, certain function, but I think having those critical experiences are so important. And in our company, actually, we care for that. But if we don't have that expertise in the company, we have to go and get it from outside. And we see that happening more and more in certain areas. One of the areas, for example, e-commerce, we have, I think, one of our leaders here from that function. design in the last couple of years, in certain areas of IT, marketing, social media. So you have to bring it from outside. But I think if we can give the critical experiences to our associates in different functions and geographies and areas, they become a whole person, a global citizen, a corporate, basically enterprise person where they have a systems understanding. And that's, I think, something very much appreciated by also by the new generations. Functions do have differences. I mean, if you look at a function like, for example, manufacturing, you see a lot of expertise, many years, long tenure, and you go to a marketing where you have a different profile. So you have to really you have to know your people and the data. And then accordingly, I think you have to close the gaps with either bringing talent from outside or with the critical experiences we can offer to our associates, which is valued.
So what I would add, I think you all know I work in the pharmaceutical industry. Trust me, you want experts in the pharmaceutical industry. And what I think is unique is I work with a lot of scientists and people who are PhDs, and there's the need for experts, obviously, in those spaces. We have scientists who spent their entire lives studying one molecule, studying one thing, and that's important because it helps us come up with innovation in the space that, again, ultimately, as our purpose at Pfizer is around breakthroughs that change patients' lives. I think what's unique about the company, though, is what you're looking for coming in is an organization where you can learn, where you're challenged from, and your expertise comes from trying out new things. At Pfizer, we have this process what we call secondments, which was new to me coming in, but this time where you can say, look, I want to go work for a year or 2 years in a space that's not unique to me. I don't know anything about it, and we encourage that. We encourage people to learn, to stretch, because that, I think, is what builds sort of expertise, and expertise that's valid right now is not going to be valid 5 years from now. The jobs that we're looking at having in our organization 5 or 10 years from now do not exist. And I think that's the thing to think about in an organization. Are you challenged to learn, to stretch, to grow? I've worked for organizations where I've run plants, I've done M&A work, I've actually sort of run businesses and P&Ls, and now I'm leading diversity and inclusion strategies for organizations. So I've always chosen and thought about organizations where you can stretch and grow, and that's important for building, I think, expertise, because it changes so quickly.
This is so interesting, actually, that when I joined the diversity network, I thought I was the only one coming from business, and then you start talking to the colleagues, and everybody has actually an interesting background. So I think that's already happening. Most of our organizations are aware of the need of, bringing different expertise into the different functions, but it will be needed more and more. I think that's the reality of the new generations and the younger people.
Okay.
That I'll add as I'm listening to this is just some actual experiences that I've had in the past 5 months where I've had actual business leaders and people from operations inquire how they can have some type of leadership role within the inclusion and diversity space as it relates to their job, right? So they're asking how, while keeping their job, they can affect the culture and the outcomes in the company with regard to inclusion and diversity outside of their immediate area of responsibility. So what we're seeing is that the impact overall is starting to reach such that people are starting to feel like it is part of their job, and it is something that they need to do well in order to truly be an expert.
And so let's stay with that a little bit, because I think as we think about these different levels of expertise, and we think about how quickly some jobs are changing, but some jobs, even though they're changing quickly, you're still going to need a level of expertise. I think about financial industry, one of the biggest things we've had to figure out is what's actually a market cycle, right? That's changed. And before, if you didn't go through a full 5 to 7 market year cycle, you knew nothing, right? And so you've got managers who have this idea of what this kind of expertise is that you need. Then, if you think about the different demographics in the workplace and some of the assumptions or biases that come along with that, how does this concept of expertise and this concept of generational intersectionality with other demographics, does this concept of expertise changing help us to be able to advance more, diverse demographics in the workplace, or is it going to hurt us? What do you think, and how is it playing out today in your organizations?
I'll just offer one example. In our investment management space, this concept of expertise is so critical to gender parity and the ability for women portfolio managers to continue to be successful even after they take a leave of absence, whether that be to start a family or for other reasons. It used to be, and I think it was the accepted wisdom, that if you left, your track record was impacted, and for some reason the thought was you somehow couldn't be as effective when you came back. This notion that you've somehow lost some expertise or were out of touch. And what we're in discussions in our business with our clients, we're starting to understand that if we want to be able to benefit from women making up half the workforce, if we want that diversity of thinking and ability in our companies, this notion that expertise is lost when you leave the company for a certain period of time, and that track record is somehow impacted, we need to rethink that. And so portfolio management is just one specific area where questioning the definition of expertise and changing mindsets around how that expertise is not lost, but perhaps organizations can think differently about onboarding women back into the workplace or staying connected with them while they're on their leave can bridge that, and so we don't lose that diversity and that benefit.
I would say it helps, because I think those of us who do diversity and inclusion work are always looking for ways to sort of connect people across difference and and create value and find value in that. And so when we talked earlier about things that generations who've been around, more tenured workforce, have to share with newer generations that are coming along, things that newer generations have and exposure to things that maybe people in more tenured roles don't have, there's an opportunity to share across difference and to learn from each other and actually to help each other grow, I think, as professionals and executives and things inside of companies. So I think it's actually exciting from a diversity and inclusion standpoint, because it is one of those areas that I think helps drive the diversity and inclusion agenda forward, when we can get people to work across that difference, that generational difference.
I think what I've noticed in particular, and I think we're going to hear about this later today, but the growing strength and momentum of the concept of business and employee resource groups has helped that tremendously, because what I've seen in our organization is that, one, the leadership of those organizations attract leaders, right? Young, new in position, people with different areas of expertise drawing together for something that is initially a similarity that they have or a similar interest that they have. And then what we're finding is that it's exposing people who are very smart already to other areas of expertise, and it's improving their or increasing their curiosity, and it's allowing them to have exposure to things across functions that they would not have normally had exposure to. And what we're finding is that curiosity is moving into what their feeling of purpose in the company is, versus just doing their job. So this is going to be, I think, something that, because with our leadership team, they're asking now more of what can our resource groups do in particular areas, and you know, they're cross-functional, and so they are looking for value from that. So I see that increasing in terms of.
But before, what does that mean? So I did not quite understand that part around. They're looking for the BRGs to perform various functional activities to drive the business. I didn't understand your last.
So I'll give you an example. Our Asian Action Network, some time ago, was called on by one of our senior executives to help make contact with some of our Asian dentists who were refusing to take our calls in terms of our sales folks going in to the offices and recommending our products. And there were issues that they had, that one of which was they wanted to see Asian people come to visit them, right? And so they weren't seeing that enough, and so they were kind of reluctant to take the calls. And we asked the Asian Action Network to deploy and to, you know, from a multicultural and multifunctional standpoint, address a population of dentists. And we crossed that barrier, and it was a new way of looking at how we solve a problem that was not our own. So.
Thank you.
Another change I think that's happening is the team concept, because in the past I think it was more strict, like my team, your team, finance team. Now everything is very multifunctional. If you look at innovation, it's multifunctional. If you look at customer teams, they are multifunctional. So that gives us also an opportunity of bringing all these multifunctional, multicultural, and generational, I think, teams together. And we started using responsive working, especially with the innovation process, or agile ways of working with other functions, which again gives people opportunity to use techniques like rounds, for example, where you have to hear every voice before you come to a conclusion on a matter. So I think this whole concept of team, as it's changing, it's helping, I believe, to hear the voices of different generations in a respectful fashion, to drive innovation, growth, and productivity or new business models.
Thank you. I think that was, I think, really helpful for us to start to think about how these concepts are going to continue to evolve. So I want to take a pause there. Are there any questions in the audience? I see one there and two over there. I don't know where the mics are. We'll come to you next.
Thank you. This question is specific to Mr. Kelly. You had mentioned earlier that Colgate-Palmolive really does focus on the intellectual curiosity, and that's a big component of the organization. As performance indicators in performance evaluations, how strong is your intellectual curiosity measured versus the P&L and the budget and the profit?
It's a great question. It's something that we really don't have much data on right now. But one of the things that we are looking to be able to measure going forward, in recent years, we've introduced MindSpark to our organization, which allows us to push out different training and different pieces of information for them to access. But it also enables them to create streams of information that not only provide us with information, but will enable them to get to answers that they want to have. And then, so it allows us to manage what goes out. It also allows us to understand what they're interested in, because we can see where their streams are going. But it also enables them to create areas of curiosity. And so we'll know at some point, we're starting to measure some of where the activity is, but I think that'll be really, really interesting for us. And I know I was surprised with how much time people spend there in the MindSpark area. And what we're finding is that there are a lot of people who are popping up with different areas of curiosity, but also different areas of expertise and questions about why aren't we doing certain things. So it's really spurring a lot of innovative thinking.
Just to build on that, an Indo data with Microsoft. I know it was talked about Microsoft earlier. I was just wondering, many of you have had P&L responsibilities before, and now you're chief diversity officers. How do you kind of bring that business leadership thinking into the diversity and inclusion role? There's traditionally been kind of an HR pipeline into this role. I'm curious, just some of your backgrounds, you've run strong P&Ls, et cetera. I'd love to know how that brings kind of a different lens and a different perspective.
So I'll start. I think for me, I often tell people the same tools, the same skills and competencies that you use to lead any business. When you lead D&I that way, you get results. So one of the things that was important when I came into Pfizer was we started benchmarking. So same things you do running an operation or a plant. How are we doing in diversity and inclusion against our competitors in the industry? So after we understood that, we started to then sort of go in and look at the organization and say, so where are the areas that we, against benchmark, need to work? We've just defined particularly goals to say, look, we want to have women at our VP and above at 50% in the next 5 years. That brings us, again, up to industry. We're saying we want to lead in that space. So I think the same skills that you would use in business to do anything, if you can bring that thinking, having goals, where are we focused? The organization now kind of understands where we're focusing when it comes to women and U.S. minorities. So I talk about myself more as an operational kind of CDO because, again, I'm using the same skills that I used when I was running a P&L to run D&I. I have a strategy. Everybody understands that strategy. So everyone can sort of support and understand where we're going. We have our goals. We have a team that supports that and helps sort of move it forward. So I think, again, it's not, I don't think about it in any way different than if I were running a P&L or operating a business. It's very personal, and I think that's where people that's the connection. I think it's very personal because it touches everybody. I've not met a single individual who doesn't have a view or a perspective around diversity and inclusion. So that's what makes the work exciting because when done well, it actually advances a business's strategies forward.
Yeah, as a business leader, our focus areas are growth, innovation, productivity, people, and sustainability, right? So if you look at those pillars, actually, and you take the diversity lens, you know, if you can have a more diverse workforce from generational, cultural, all different aspects, you will have better growth, better innovation. Productivity-wise, I think the inclusion aspect can really bring you the productivity because you want to get the best environment so that you have the best results, and that will really bring, I hope, the efficiency, the productivity to the processes, and the people agenda and sustainability. So there's a lot of similarities as long as we can approach it. And today, actually, that gives us a very simple diversity strategy. For us, we have to represent our consumers, customers. I'm sure it's the same for most of us. We have to create an inclusive environment, and then we should also support our communities, which can easily be converted to the business also leadership metrics.
There was a question over here.
Thank you very much. My name is Clayton Banks. I'm the founder and CEO of Silicon Harlem. And so my prism is technology. I'd like to, this is going to be a bizarre question. So try to hang with me on this. So one of the things in my company, on my teams, I require them to have a digital assistant as part of the team. We're looking towards the future of having robots on our teams. My question is, what role will you play when that future comes, and it's coming quickly, where your teams will literally have a robot on it? And will you have a role of making sure that the AI-powered robot is not biased, for example? Doesn't recognize someone's voice and starts to talk to them like, yo, man, what's up, you know? I mean, what will your role be? And I know this is probably not on your mind today, but I do believe
yes, it is.
Oh, well, good. Then I'll shut up and let you talk.
No, I'll just add, it's a great point. The chief diversity officers that I work with, it's very much on all of our minds. And I think it's interesting because we've been doing some work at Pfizer. We're one of Catalyst's partners. I saw Lorraine earlier here. And they're doing a whole space around the future of work, Clayton. So I think one of those things that we've really been talking about now is making sure that, again, those algorithms that are designed don't have bias in them, being aware of that. I think what's important is to understand how to embrace the future, because I think sometimes people's minds go to, we need to fight this. This is going to happen. This is already happening, and people are thinking about it 50 years out. No, it's happening right now in all of our organizations, how we're recruiting, the different algorithms and programs that we're running and using to help us get more efficient. So D&I is at the table in HR and in other areas having conversations with technologists and people who are leading this in our organization, our digital transformation, to say we need to make sure that this is going to be fair and equitable for everybody as we move forward. And how do you embrace it? There's a lot of good stuff that's happening there too that's going to actually, I think, help in D&I. We could talk more about that too.
Yeah. As Willard mentioned, it's definitely top of mind for us, and we've all seen the research, the evidence, terrifying results when those algorithms go wrong. Decisions about facial recognition, for example, in arrests and criminal prosecutions, what happens with juries when you don't have the right information being presented. So we think about that, and that's why we are so intent on making sure that there is diversity in the development of those technologies. But diversity and the human becomes that much more important because data is not knowledge. And it's the human and the human experience and the lived experience that turns that data, analyzes that data, and turns it into something that you can take action on and change strategy and make different decisions.
And this is also beyond one company or our companies. I think recently World Economic Forum established a group called Future Council on Equality and Inclusion. And the main focus we are actually having as a group now in all aspects of recruitment, development, retention, what are the different tools, technology tools that are in the market and upcoming, and how they are going to be really facilitating our work, but also what are the biases that might be. So as a group, actually, we are approaching this now because you are absolutely right. This can be very positive, but also very detrimental to our work.
Yeah, and the only thing that I would add is, as I think about it, as people I know think about it, as colleagues and my peer group that have conversations about this continue to caution, is that we keep a close eye on not only what's going on, but who's creating it, and what the purpose of, or their purpose is in creating it, et cetera. And I think that there's always going to be a human element, and needs to be a human element to any form of inclusion, diversity, and human thinking and outcomes. And so this is probably the most critical time where we're needed in the development of this type of technology. And I think that each perspective really matters, right? Because even the four of us up here have different perspectives, and none of one of them is completely correct. So it's just something that, I mean, I think you should pay attention to it too, because you're never going to be able to fully replace a human perspective.
The only thing I would add is, I agree with all of what everyone said. I think the other thing that we continue to work about, so we have a big technology organization at our company. We do continue to worry about the lack of just demographic diversity. There's not enough people of color. There's not enough women in just STEM. And if you keep going all the way back to grade school with all of the biases that kind of creep in, and then you just don't have the pipeline. So we are really looking critically at how we invest now, but we're also thinking about, you know, and many other companies are, just not ours, but we've got to figure out how we get more diversity into the pipeline so that it won't be this dearth 20 years from now, because we're going to keep going down the same path, and we will continue to play a role in that, but we play a really critical role right now in influencing our companies and in really making sure that the hiring pipeline is there. And that comes with all of the stuff that we spend our time doing around diverse hiring panels, blah, 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 blah.
Thank you for bringing that up. Really, it's a great question.
There was one over here and then one. I'm sorry, one over there and then one over here. So you have the mic? Go ahead. And then can you go give a mic to that person? Thank you.
Yeah, my name is Anwar Sayed. I am with the Colgate Palmolive. My question to any of the panelists is, what happiness meant for the employees is back in 40s and 60s and 80s, and nowadays is fastly changing. Even though, as we discussed throughout the day, all the principles for the diversity and inclusion, as a manager, even you apply, the new generations, I feel that mindset is instant gratification in terms of career upwards. In previously, the managers thought maybe you need 3 to 5 years to move up your career ladder. Nowadays, they're looking for 6 months to 1 year. How do you overcome this challenge, even if you are, despite following all these principles? Any of the panelists can answer that. How do you manage that?
Very carefully. Who's got this one?
I think there is definitely the short term, long term in the careers also, for sure. And that's an area we are always questioning in the organization health surveys. Like, is this becoming the next compensation question where you will never get the best results? But I think the whole idea of experiences, so the instant gratification, is it only the financial benefits or promotion or level, etc., or is it the experiences? I think we have to really bring it together and make sure that while the promotion, etc., is planned and happening, maybe still slower than they expect, but that experience piece is becoming very critical. And especially for global companies, we have a big lever. I think if people are mobile, I think giving that international experience can really grow people significantly, and in the future can really give them that boost, maybe more than they expect. So that's a lever we have to use early on in the careers. In the past, I think we were keeping it for the higher levels. When you're an executive, you will get to some place as an expat. Now it's a very expensive model. And I would say either international, multifunctional, and team experiences is something we have to use in addition to the promotions, the usual way of recognition.
I think you have to manage it, head on. I'm very direct. I mean, I have a team that's very diverse. I have people that are older than me. I have people that are younger than me on my team. And I talk with people about this instant gratification thing. This is Willard's view of the world. What we're doing when we're developing you in a career, in a company, and building expertise, we're not paying you for when things go right. We're paying you and developing you so that when things go wrong, you know what to do. And you can't do that unless you have some experience. So I think it's finding the right balance between saying, look, does it take 5 years to run a plant? Maybe, maybe not. But certainly there are experiences that we want you to have so that when you're running a plant at some point and something doesn't go right, you've had the required and necessary sort of pattern recognition to be able to say, who do I need to call to bring in to help? And you can't get that in a year. And so I think that's finding that right balance, but also challenging inside of the organization the people who think you need to run the plant for 10 years in order to be able to sort of run the plant. So I believe you have to have those discussions straight on, head on with both constituency groups, those who I think who are further along in their careers and those who are newer and coming along, because in the conversation is a rich learning experience about really what does it take to grow and what does it take to develop and actually be enough of an expert to be successful when things don't always go right.
Yeah, what I would add on that is it's really important that the conversation is head-on and that it begins extremely early, i.e. the recruitment process. And once you get the person into the organization, right, we're at a certain point where we can try to meet at a place. It doesn't always have to be in the middle. There are times where we have folks that expect to be in a certain place in a certain time period, and that's not feasible, and we explain to them that it's not feasible. However, we must keep them challenged. And I believe that if you keep people challenged, that fulfills a certain part of the gratification. I also think that in our company culture, we have to start to be more effective at letting it go, or letting go certain things that we expect you to have 25 years in the company to get. Because what you're going to find is that everyone's going to retire at one time and everything's going to walk out the door. And that's not a good thing, never a good thing. So I think you just have to be very, very honest. You have to address it whether you don't want to or not. And you have to push back sometimes, but don't push out. Push back, but not out. And I think that you get to a place that's acceptable for people.
I think we've come full circle on that manager point, right? It's the manager that people join a company, but they leave managers, right, who aren't challenging them and keeping them engaged. We have time for one more question, so I think you have maybe two, but probably one. Go ahead.
My name is Peter Hom. I had a question with regards to how do you manage the older employee who usually at their part in their tenure, they tend to be subject matter experts. And there's a period of time when they're at a stage where they see a bunch of young people come into the organization, and they tend to hoard their information because they feel secure in that, and they kind of put up all sorts of roadblocks because they're afraid of being replaced eventually before they're ready to go. So how do you foster that environment where people can feel more of a collaborative effort among the intergenerations?
Peter, I'll just quickly say it's what we're trying to achieve right now, because that's exactly what I think we're experiencing a little bit of at Pfizer. And I think sometimes everyone talks a lot about millennials, but that's why I think putting groups together as generations gives the chance to create a dialogue and to actually help bridge some of that, because that's a reality. You know, everybody's circumstance is different as a person, how long they want to stay in the workforce, things like that. And so I think we need to figure out creative ways to bridge that dialogue, because there's so much to be shared by that more mature manager who's been around, and putting the responsibility on them, I think, often to help develop that new generation, I think is a critical part of, again, back to the manager that you said, you know, how do you change that? Because that keeps them engaged to say, I want you to take this individual and help them grow and develop. So it brings them into the equation versus them feeling like they're being pushed out.
If I could just add something quickly to that, and that also challenges the organization to really dig into the talent experience and looking at the individual underneath all the labels. And just adding to Willard's point, what is making that manager stuck in that kind of work mindset? Is it that they don't think that there's a path for them to do something different or add capacity that might also be as fulfilling as what they're doing today? If we really want to be preserving and passing down knowledge, there are many different other ways where that more tenured manager can find ways to do that and actually get recognition and visibility for that. But when we think about the enterprise leaders that we want to have that will grow our company and take our company into the future, to build that strong succession bench, we need to be challenging, you know, back to that notion of expertise. At a point, if you want to continue to contribute to the company, to ascend in leadership, you're going to have to let go of wanting to be the deepest subject matter expert in the room, because being the expert is not going to be enough. And that's really tough feedback for someone to take, that they've spent their whole life becoming that expert and being seen as that expert. They're now having to reinvent themselves. But there could be other opportunities if you challenge and really get to know that manager and understand the experience that they want to have and what they can really provide and deliver to the company.
And I would just add, we've created a role for some folks where we really need that to start to happen, and we have to get the people into the roles. So we've created a more senior elevated role where a good portion of their job is developing the bench beneath them. And then we use them for critical client situations or team situations if they're in operations, depending on what it is. So and they do that for a couple of years, and then it's like a nice transition for them, which is very honest up front. This role is a couple of years. We're not asking you to leave, but now it's time for the next generation to come along, and you've done a great job and developed a good bench, and now we've got to let them go. But we want you to help coach them, and so we have roles like that across the org.
Yeah, I was going to talk about the feedback mechanisms also. You know, regularly we are changing the items where we evaluate our managers, because I think with this expectation of being a coach and being collaborative, being respectful of different generations, I think those feedback items you have to update regularly, and then the manager should hear what's happening. Otherwise, it can be like my world and protection, and I think we have to use all different tools actually, OrCal surveys, manager surveys, to have that dialogue.
So with that, I'd like to thank all of you for the fabulous questions. I'd like to thank the panelists for a really engaging conversation, and we hope you continue this over lunch. So thank you, everybody.
Thank you.